We start the evening. Former service chiefs, serving officers, veterans, other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. We are indeed privileged to have Dr. Kazuto Suzuki from Japan as our next eminent speaker. Dr. Suzuki is a professor at the Graduate School of Public Policy at the University of Tokyo, Japan, and the director of the Institute of Geoeconomics at International House of Japan, Tokyo. Incidentally, India International Center in New Delhi has been modeled on the lines of International House of Japan in Tokyo. Dr. Suzuki graduated from Department of International Relations, Ritsumeikan University, and received PhD from Sussex European Institute, University of Sussex, England. He has worked in the Foundation pour la Recherche Stratégique in Paris, France, as assistant researcher and the associate professor at the University of Tsukuba from 2000 to 2008, and served as the professor of international politics at Hokkaido University up to 2020. He was in the panel of experts for Iranian Sanctions Committee under the United Nations Security Council from 2013 to July 2015. He currently serves as a member of the National Space Policy Committee of the Cabinet of the Office of the Government of Japan and the President of Japan Association of International Security and Trade. His research focuses on the conjunction of science, technology, and international relations. Subjects have included space policy, non-proliferation, export control, and sanctions. His recent works included Space and International Politics. It was in 2011 in Japanese and was awarded Sunatro Prize for the Social Sciences and Humanities. He's published the Policy, Logics, and Institutions of European Space Collaboration 2003 and many other works. Japan is a great power with the world's third largest economy by nominal GDP and fourth largest PPP. Although Japan has announced its right to declare war, the country maintains the self-defense forces that rank as one among the world's stronger militaries. Japan has the world's highest life expectancy, though it is experiencing a population decline. It is a global leader in the automotive, robotics, and electronics industries and has made significant contribution to science and technology. Japan has close economic and military relations with the United States, with which it maintains a security alliance. The US is committed to defending the country with military bases in Japan. And Japan was the initiator of Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, the Quad, and is a very active member there. And as you all know, that Indian Air Force is currently undertaking a joint air exercise with Japanese air self-defense forces in Japan. Japan does have territorial disputes with some of its neighbors. Japan contests Russia's control of the Southern Kuril Islands, which were occupied by the Soviet Union in 1945. South Korea's control of the Landquart Rocks is acknowledged but not accepted as they are claimed by Japan. Japan has strained relations with China over the Senkaku Islands. But Japan has been spending around 1% of its GDP on defense till 2020. And yet it has the 9th largest military budget in the world. The Japanese self-defense forces were restricted by Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution, which renounced Japan's right to declare war or use military force in international disputes. The deployment of troops to Iraq and Afghanistan marked the first overseas use of Japanese military since World War II. In 2014, late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe had said that Japan wanted to shed the passiveness that it had maintained since end of World War II and take more responsible positions on regional security. The government of Japan has made changes to its security policy, which include establishment of the National Security Council, the adoption of the National Security Strategy, and the development of the National Defense Program guidelines. Recent tensions, particularly with North Korea and China, have reignited the debate over the status of the JSDF. And just last month, Japan unveiled record defense budget with 20% rise in military spending, taking it to $55 billion. This is part of the new national security strategy that aims to double Japan's defense spending to 2% of GDP by 2027. And Japan has a growing space program. In December 2021, Prime Minister Kishida said during a meeting on space development strategy that we are aiming to realize a lunar landing by Japanese astronauts in the later half of the 2020s. That means another 5-7 years from now. Japan will join the American Artemis program to advance lunar exploration. We couldn't have had a more eminent speaker to talk to us on Japan's space and national security policy. Dr. Suzuki will also cover how these two elements impact at the global level. There are some great videos of his talks on the internet. We are really looking forward to listening to him. Other than speaker and myself, all will remain muted. After his talk, we will have a Q&A session that will be conducted by Air Vice Marshal Anil Gulani, the Additional Director General of CAPS. You are requested to put your questions in the chat box. And now over to Dr. Suzuki. Dr. Suzuki.
Thank you very much, Air Marshal Chopra. Thank you very much for air power and air power studies. My name is Kazuto Suzuki. I am very delighted to speak in front of you. As Air Marshal Chopra has explained, I am currently a member of the Japan's National Space Policy Committee, which is the advisory committee, but basically it is one of the major policy-making institutions, and I am responsible for the space security. So today I am going to talk about the space security in Japan, and I think perhaps you may have a certain interest in discussing about the recent Japanese changes of its security policy, which I am to some extent involved. I was invited as one of the experts to input the space security part by the National Security Secretariat, which is the author of the National Security Strategy and the other two documents. So what I'm trying to do here today is that I am going to discuss a little bit of history and background of why and how Japanese space policy concept has evolved. And then I will discuss a little bit on the issue with regard to the basic space law, which was established in 2008. And then I will discuss the Japan's space strategy in this in the current security environment in Japan. So let me start with the history of the Japanese space security. Japan, perhaps you may know, and Air Marshal Chopra has explained that Japan has a very strong self-constraining framework by the Constitution. So Constitution Article 9 renounces the declaration of war and any engagement of the Japan to pursue its national interest by using forces. In other words, Japan can only exercise the military power when it comes to the self-defense. So the idea was developed, perhaps it's almost obvious that because of the very painful history of the Japan engagement in the World War II. Japan has lost, and Japan, under the occupation of the United States and allies, Japan had to establish a very peaceful constitution. So the notion of the peaceful constitution, which means that Japan's retrenchment or retreat from the engagement in the international military or security framework is the major sort of a major foundation of the Japanese security understanding. So meanwhile, Japan has engaged with the United States for establishing the alliance, so that the Japan-US Security Pact is basically a unique alliance system that the United States has an treaty obligation to defend Japan when it's attacked, but Japan does not exercise the right of the collective self-defense. So these are the very uniqueness of the Japanese security structure, but that's not going to be the major subject of the discussion today. So in this context of the peaceful constitution, Japan or Japanese parliament or diet has decided that unanimously that Japan will not engage any military use of space. It is not only limited for the use of space, but also the military development of technology, the ownership of the satellites, and the operation of the satellites are also renounced because of this Diet resolution. So that resolution, which was adopted in 1969, has haunted the Japanese space activities, because all Japanese space programs have to be done by the funding from the civilian agency and technology from the civilians, and no military involvement, no military funding available for the Japanese space program. So in this sense, India shares a similar history of separation of the space activities from the civilian and the military for many years, and Japan started in a sort of a similar starting point. This 1969 Diet resolution has come under the very heavy criticism by the United States, that when the United States start using its military telecommunication with its allies. The satellite communication program was offered to Japan, but Japan has denied the acceptance of the program because of this Diet resolution. Diet resolution again defines not to use, own, develop, and operate spacecraft. But since the United States is shifting its military telecommunication to space, the Japanese self-defense force, which is which relies on the U.S. Coordination with the United States, cannot afford to continue denying the use of space. So what Japanese government has done is to reinterpret the resolution in 1985. From 1985, the Japanese self-defense force were able to use space, which is commercially available. So before that, the Japanese self-defense force were not able to use the commercially available data of the weather, or which was not be able to use the commercially available services like broadcast. But after 1985, the self-defense force can use the commercially available one. So Japan will be able to use space assets for the telecommunication, and also the commercially available satellite observations. However, the Japanese self-defense force have not been allowed to develop and own and operate the spacecrafts. So when the Cold War was over, and then we realized that North Korea has been in the development of the long-range missiles, including the intercontinental ballistic missiles, the Japan has been shocked to know that the North Korea was capable of shooting a missile flying over Japan in 1998. In 1998, this was the missile or space launch was called Taepodong. The Taepodong, which was launched from the soil of North Korea, was a big shock to Japan because not only shocked by North Korean having such military capabilities, but also because of not knowing that not having an intelligence that North Korea is developing such weapon systems. And one of the problem was that the United States did not provide sufficient intelligence to inform Japan that this is, the North Korea is developing such capabilities. So the Japanese politicians, which enjoyed the information sharing, intelligence sharing with the United States, start to question about the lack of having the capability of reconnaissance, surveillance, or information gathering. So in 1998, Japan decided to develop the satellite called the Information Gathering Satellite, or IGS. The IGS was typical reconnaissance satellite, but the problem was this 1969 Diet resolution. The self-defense force were not allowed to develop, own, and operate the surveillance or reconnaissance satellite. So this IGS was designated to the cabinet or the prime minister's office, which have the coordinating office for the intelligence gathering. So this was again another big problem because the cabinet office or the prime minister's office has the certain limitation of provision of the information from the prime minister's office to the Ministry of Defense because of the protection of the Government Secret Act. The Protection of Government Secret Act designate that the certain government departments were required to have a permission to transfer the information which are designated as the state secret. The satellite pictures were designated as a state secret. Therefore, every time that the Ministry of Defense wants to acquire information from the Prime Minister's office, then it requires the licenses or permission. So this has been a big problem, but still the Japanese system has not changed. The self-defense force were not yet allowed to develop, own, and operate spacecraft. Then in 2008, this was the big change of the 2008 was a big change of the Japanese space program as a whole, including civil and the military. The idea of basic space law was to transform the Japanese space program from the civilian R&D oriented space program to more industrial and the military use of space for the better purpose of improving the society and serving for the national interest. So in 2008, the basic space law has allowed Japanese government to use space for the purpose of the national security. And this has lifted the, let's say, curse of the 1969 Diet Resolution. So from then, the Japanese Ministry of Defense and Self-Defense Force were able to gain access to the development, ownership, and the operation of the spacecraft. However, the Self-Defense Force, because it has been under this Diet Resolution for so many years, the Self-Defense Force was constructed without the access of the space information and space telecommunications, etc. So the Self-Defense Force and the Ministry of Defense were reluctant to invest in space in the first place when the basic space law was established. But gradually, the Japanese Ministry of Defense and the Self-Defense Force start to realize that space needs to be changed, and the space is a vitally important segment of its defense capability. The initial program that Ministry of Defense was involved was the SSA, or Space Situational Awareness. The space situational awareness was to monitor the movement of any space objects which are bigger than the size of softball. The United States was very keen on developing the international coalition of the SSA because in 2007, China has exercised its ASAT, the anti-satellite test, to destroy its own satellite to demonstrate that its capability of shooting down the satellite. This was a big shock to the United States that the space was considered to be a sanctuary, but no longer there. The space is no longer being a sanctuary, but it is the war-fighting domain, which means that, space is so important for major space powers like United States, China, Russia, India, and Europe. The United States realized that the Chinese capability of destroying satellite will also be possible to take out the U.S. satellites when it comes to the military conflict with China. So in order to make sure that the U.S. is capable of monitoring the health of the satellites and make sure that these acts to harm the harmful exercise of Chinese activities should be monitored. But if United States have only capability of monitoring the skies above United States territory, that's not enough to monitor everything. So United States needs to have the coalition of the SSA alliance, and Japan was also being asked to develop its SSA capabilities. For many years, the JAXA, the Japanese Civilian Space Agency, has developed its capabilities of the monitoring the space objects, but these space capabilities by the civilian agency were not supposed to be the one that contributes to the US SSA network, because the SSA is the military network, because it is based on the information or intelligence sharing among the militaries, because United States is the most active user of space for the military purposes. So in order to secure the location and information with regard to the US military satellites, the United States wants to have Japanese Ministry of Defense to be involved in this SSA network. And again, as I said, the Japanese Ministry of Defense were not used to spend any budget for the space activities, so the Ministry of Defense were not really willing to the investment in space, particularly the SSA, because there is no satellite for Ministry of Defense to defend, because we haven't used, we don't own, we don't operate this military satellite. So why do we need to monitor space if we don't have anything to protect? But again, because of the United States and its alliance with the United States, Japanese government decided to engage into this US SSA alliance. So this is the first space budget space budget was prepared to invest in the radar system, which was developed in Japan for the Ministry of Defense, instead of sending money, investing in the existing, the JAXA's radar and telescope, which are under the control of the civilian agency. And after the investment or starting to engage in SSA, the Ministry of Defense gradually understand that the importance of space activities, particularly through these exercises in the campaigns of United States using space for the intervention in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria, and many other places. But mostly the Japanese Ministry of Defense has changed its position because of the changing nature of the security environment around Japan. The first major threat was the North Korea, which were developing the nuclear and the missile capabilities. Although North Korea is a small country and which doesn't have the capability other than the missile to attack Japan, but still, there is a significant threat from North Korea because the Sea of Japan, which is a sea between the Korean Peninsula and Japan, has been the major theater for the North Korea to exercise its military missile test. So every time that North Korea launches missile, particularly for the medium and long range missiles, the Japan has been, Japan has exercised its early warning and prepare for any type of the attack from the North Korea. So North Korea has been always in the radar scope of Japan's security, but at the same time, we are fully aware of the development of the Chinese capabilities. We do have, as Air Marshal Chopra has explained, that we do have a territorial dispute, although the Japanese government does not recognize it as a territorial dispute, because the Senkaku Islands were in fact occupied by Japan, so we don't recognize it as a territorial dispute. It's a unilateral claim by China. But other than that, I think there is a very strong concerns about the buildup of the Chinese military capabilities, including its maritime development in South China Sea, East China Sea, and also its ambition to invade Taiwan. So because the Japan's reliance on Taiwan for the provision of the semiconductor, and there are many other issues with regard to the Taiwan Strait, particularly with regard to the maritime or sea lane issues. The 80% of the Japanese trade go through the Taiwan Strait or the or East China Sea, which go through the nearby Taiwan. So if China exercise its military power to blockade the Taiwan Strait, or exercise its military power to invade Taiwan, then there is a significant impact on the sea lane for Japan, and also there are significant issues with regard to the Japanese compatriots in Taiwan. And of course, Taiwan is the major provider of the semiconductor. So the Ministry of Defense are now starting to realize that it needs to have an power to move over to have some sort of a counter capabilities if China attacks on Taiwan and then eventually to the Japanese soil. Because if Taiwan is invaded, then it depends on the U.S. forces to protect Taiwan. If the United States decide to protect Taiwan, then there will be it is almost certain that the China will attack on the U.S. bases in Japan. So the Taiwan Strait issue is directly related to the situation in the Japanese its own territorial defense. So in order to demonstrate the counter strike capabilities to renounce and to deter the Chinese Chinese attempt to attack on Japan, Japan needs to have the counter-strike capability together with the alliance and the joint operation with the United States. So, like it or not, Japan will have no choice but to engage into the Taiwan situation. So, the National Security Strategy document, which was published end of last year, which was 3-4 weeks ago, Japan has re-established and reconfigurate the Japan's space capabilities. As Air Marshal Chopra has explained, that this decision includes having the counter-strike capabilities and increasing or doubling the Japanese defense spending, and but also it has a significant implication in space capabilities. Currently, the Japanese Ministry of Defense has the radar system, which is under development in Japan. So that's one portion of military capability in space. But other than that, Japan has only 2 satellites, or 3 in the near future. 3 telecommunication satellites, which are exclusively serving for the self-defense forces. But the Ministry of Defense or Self-Defense Force does not own the reconnaissance satellite or weather satellite, or even the GPS or the navigation satellites. The navigation satellites are conducted by the Cabinet Office, which are used for the civilian purposes, and the reconnaissance satellites were, again, as I explained, owned and operated by the Prime Minister's office. So the Ministry of Defense is now starting to reconfigure its space assets. The first of which is the developing the constellation of the satellite for reconnaissance. It is going to be about a 50 satellite constellation, which will allow Japan to have the better time, better solution, or the better revisiting time of the certain designated places. So the 50 satellite constellation will provide like at least the every 6 hours access to the certain point on the Earth. And this satellite constellation is the first step to have the large-scale space program, which is funded and developed and owned and operated by the Ministry of Defense and Self-Defense Forces. The second important one is to build up the a maritime domain awareness. The Quad framework, including India, had a promise of sharing the maritime information of the illegal movement on maritime space. So this Quad commitment for sharing intelligence of the of maritime domain awareness, the Japanese Ministry of Defense is involving in the maritime domain awareness capability building, including the buildup of the SAR satellite, the synthetic aperture radar satellite. This is not yet there is not yet idea of the constellation of the SAR satellite, but there are a couple, two private industry which are currently building the small satellite constellation for SAR capability with SAR capabilities. So the Ministry of Defense is in discussion with these private industries to develop its maritime monitoring capabilities. And also, there is a certain idea, which is not yet written in the strategic document, but to develop the signal intelligence satellite, which which identifies the vessels or any equipments which are emitting the signals on the maritime domain. Usually in the maritime domain, you use the AIS, the Automated Identification System. The AIS is most of the commercial and civilian and some of the military vessels own and equip the AIS machine and then emit the signals which identifies those vessels. However, some of the military vessels, as well as the illegal civilian vessels, were switched off from the AIS, so that you can't identify these vessels by just watching the AIS signals. So it is not enough to monitor the maritime situation by looking at the AIS signals. So in addition to the AIS monitoring, Japan and AIS monitoring is a civilian capability. So in addition to the AIS capabilities, the Japanese Self-Defense Force and the Ministry of Defense are considering, not yet decided, to build up the capability of detecting the signal intelligence satellite, which detects all this, pickups all the signals which are emitted from the vessels not the AIS signals, but all signals, including the telecommunications. So these are the major development at this moment. The Japan has been in charge of this discussion of the uh, space safety and the security arrangement. But also, one of the another aspect that may be outstanding in Japan is that the Japan is trying to lead the building up the international rules and the international norms for for maintaining the stability and sustainability in space. The Japanese government has been offering the international meetings on the Space Sustainability Conference every year in last 15 years. And Japan as a government as a whole trying to build up the space sustainability rules at the level of United Nations, the Paris, which is under the Conference of Disarmament, and the UN COPUOS, the UN Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space, so on and so forth. And one of the interesting initiative by Japan is that the Japanese government has established a new guideline for the transparency of the orbital services. There is a company called the Astroscale, which is the commercial company to remove the space debris. The space debris removal is basically the technology which can remove, which is considered, which is called the RPO, the rendezvous and proximity operations. The RPO is to get to approach to the space object and capture it and take it away from the orbit. So this deorbit technology can be useful for removing the debris, which is harmful for everybody, but also it can be used for removing the other country's satellite. So it can be used as a space weapon, so to say. And this technology, these commercial activities were not intended to design to remove someone's satellite, but it is to remove the debris. So in order to make a distinction between the removal of the debris and the removal of satellite, that is the transparency. So the Japanese government, under this guidelines, the Astroscale has to announce all the intended change of orbit and any actions that is related to the approaching to the foreign objects, and to declare its intent to approach a certain object, so that any other country will be able to monitor and verify the intent, and to inform any other operators which are operating nearby orbits. So this guideline is basically designed as the national guideline, but at the same time, this can be provided as the reference point or some sort of a benchmark for other country to exercise its military activities in space with transparency. The transparency is the Japan will provide this guideline as the reference point that any type of orbital move needs to be declared, needs to be transparent, and if the government does not commit itself to provide information for the transparency, then it can be assumed that there is something that this orbital movement may have some uh, malign intent or some intent which cannot be declared. So the Japanese exercise will set the de facto standard of operation, and this standard operation procedure will be the sort of a de facto rules of will be the de facto international rules to set the sort of standard whether these orbital movement is friendly or hostile. So I think I've spoke enough, and I will stop here. I am looking forward to have a discussion with you, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Suzuki. This is AVM Anil Gulani, ADG here, and I will moderate the Q&A session for the evening for an exceptional talk and your expose on the security policy and space issues of Japan. I'll just start with the first question, which is by the DG Caps. When he says that you are an expert on geo-economic security, and if you could just highlight how it plays out in the East and the South China Seas on the geo-economic security aspect, your opinion on that.
Right. The geoeconomics is a geopolitical object. Using the economy for the geopolitical objectives or geostrategic objectives. So what happened in the South and East China Sea is that the economic relationship between Japan, South Korea, China, Taiwan, and the Southeast Asian countries. Geoeconomic, there is a very complicated issue, and I need another hour to talk about this. But the focusing on space, one of the very keen point is the question of the supply chain. The space, as Japan is capable of developing its own satellite. China does so too, but many of the parts, components, and materials are coming from each other. So we need to monitor and identify all these supply chain which may be vulnerable to the international conflict. The geoeconomics is all about how to protect the economic, how to maintain the supplies, how to maintain its technology in case of the international conflict. So the supply chain resilience for space is now being a major issue. And even though Japan does not rely on China for major product, including the semiconductor, which is used for spacecraft, but still there are a number of materials that Japan has developed. Japan depends on China. So that is the current situation in the geo-economic situation between Japan and China in space. But the geopolitical issue or geostrategic issue in East China Sea is basically the conflict on the territory around Senkaku Islands, and that's I've already explained. So thank you for your question.
Thank you, Mr. Suzuki. The next question, I'll just club two questions into one. The first is on the Japan's ballistic missile defense. Even though it has not achieved the required potency, but last year, the North Korean missile that got fired, Japan did not intercept it. If you can, educate us on that. And secondly, how, in your opinion, how does Japan aim to address the future security challenge for the Japan self-defense forces, considering the increasing belligerence and rising military power of China and North Korea, respectively? That is your opinion on that.
Right. Thank you very much. The ballistic missile defense is a very expensive system, and North Korea has been exercising the missile tests over and over again, and we can't respond all of them. Japan has the early warning system, which are information provided from United States, and also its own radar and everything. So this combination of the early warning system with, together with the United States, provides the certain accuracy of the location of or the launch of the North Korean missile, and also the trajectory. If we are able to identify the trajectory that doesn't fall onto the Japanese soil, then we just let it go. So we don't shoot down any missiles that is coming towards us. If it's go over us, we don't shoot down. If the trajectory suggests that it is landing on Japan, then we'll shoot it down. So the reason why we don't intercept the North Korean missile was because we identified that these missiles are not coming to Japan, which is flying over Japan. The challenges from China is enormous, but I think everything starts from the alliance with the United States. We believe that the deterrence on China, together with this extended deterrence by United States, and also the the U.S. presence on the Japanese soil, there are a large number of the U.S. military bases, air, marine, air, navy, land, and marines are on Japan. So I think these are enough posture against China in terms of the combined forces of Japanese self-defense force and the U.S. forces on Japan are enough to deter China to invade not only Japan but deter Chinese invasion to Taiwan. So that is the basic situation, and the future challenges will be definitely about the new technologies, the new strategy and tactics that China can employ through its technological advances, like use of drones, and the swarm operation of drones is one big threat to Japan. Also, they're using the drone submarines, which may have a potential threat for the maritime security for Japan. And also, we are considering that China will increase its military capabilities by having the advanced semiconductor chips for improving its AI and improving the logistics, etc., etc. So the new technology is the key battleground for that key challenges for China to gain its superiority, technological and the military superiority against Japan and the United States. So I think Japan is supporting, although it's not engaging yet, the recent U.S. decision for restricting the export control over the semiconductor. This semiconductor, the advanced semiconductor, can only be produced by the network of supply chain from between United States, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. So if these 4 countries, including the Netherlands, so these 5 countries getting behind the US policy, then it is possible that we will be able to prevent China to get access to the high-end chips. So this, chip war, or this competition on the semiconductor issue has been the major subject for controlling the future of Chinese military capabilities, because these chips are the crucial parts of developing the AI or the quantum technology or robotics or many other things. So I think it is the right decision by the United States to tighten up the export control of over China. So it's not we are not facing China military by military. Chinese military is 10 times bigger than Japanese self-defense force. We cannot alone to defend Japan from China. So we all need what we all need is an alliance with the United States, alliance and the cooperation with the allies or the like-minded countries. We all need what we all need is an alliance with the United States, alliance and the cooperation with the allies or the like-minded countries, including Australia, India, and South Korea, to provide the collective defense capability against China or future China threats. But in order to face the China's challenges in the future, we need to do the control over the transfer of technology now.
Thank you, Mr. Suzuki. The next question, is are there any limitations to the Japan-US security alliance in case of a conflict, in your opinion? And also, if you can tell us something about, Japan has entered into a partnership with Italy and UK on developing the Tempest aircraft, which is the next generation fighter. Why the Tempest and why not the F-35, which the US is producing, or your opinion, views on that?
Right. Thank you very much. The limitation in the Japan-US Security Pact doesn't really have any outline. The limitation comes from the Japanese Constitution. So Japan has a self-imposed restriction of what it can do and what it shouldn't. So basically, the Japan-US alliance or the Japan-US Security Pact doesn't have the certain limitation, or it has a limitation on the geography. It has the Article 6 has the geographical application of this this pact, which is called the Far East Clause. So the Japan and United States cannot work together in the outside of Far East, which is basically somewhere around, outside of the East Asian region. But that's the only limitation so far, legally speaking, on the Japan-US Security Pact. By the way, Japan-US Security Pact has an Article 5, which is the collective defense clause. If there is an attack on the soil of Japan, then the United States will be capable, will have the obligation to defend Japan. So this Article 5 can be applied to the space systems. So this was acknowledged in the 2+2, which is the foreign minister and the defense minister of Japan meeting with the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense, and these four ministers recognized that the Article 5 will be applied for the attack in case of attack on space assets. So that's the another. So there is no limitation, in terms of the geography. Space is not included in this limitation of the geography. Space is included within the limitation of geography. The second question about the Japan's partnership with UK is that there are many reasons, but one of the reasons is that the UK is more enthusiastic to cooperate with Japan. Japan has a long history of cooperating and jointly developing the fighter jets and the other defense equipment. But we have always having a problem of the information security, problem of the technological issues, problem of the burden sharing, and who's paid what. So the cooperation with the United States is very troublesome and it's very complicated. Whereas in Japan, the cooperation with UK is much more straightforward, much more smooth, and both are looking at the same thing. So I think it is a very beneficial cooperation with UK and Italy on board together because of its, Italy was originally working with UK for the Tempest. So Japan, UK, and Italy cooperation is trying to, enhance the Japan's capability of working together with the other like-minded partners.
Thank you, Mr. Suzuki. I think that was quite enlightening. We come to the next question on space. Is there a credible method in the form of some kind of an implementable law which prevents countries from using the imaging satellites to cover sensitive areas and military installations of other countries, like a shutter law or something? I mean, to my mind, it's not there, but if you can educate us on this.
Right. There is the United Nations general principle, which is then agreed by many other countries, but not legally binding. This is called the remote sensing principles of remote sensing. This principle of remote sensing allows any countries to fly over the other country's territory because space is not the extension of the territorial control. So space, which is the legal definition of space, is very complicated because there is no legal definition, but usually we call it the common line, which is about 100 kilometers above the sea level. Above 100 kilometers of the sea level, the space is open to anybody. And perhaps if you know the space, how space object works, or astrophysics 101, then all these satellites are moving around the Earth. So you can't avoid passing through the certain countries. So eventually the reconnaissance satellites, Earth observation satellites, can take any pictures of any countries because it is passing by. But the United Nations principle of remote sensing allows that this will contribute to the development of the knowledge of the humankind. So and it is technically not possible to prevent the other countries to take pictures of other country. So eventually, I think it is there is no law that is capable of ordering any countries to not to take pictures. And is it possible to protect or cover the military installations every time that the satellite pass by? Yes, technically it's possible. Well, there are many, missiles which are in silo, or there are there are technologies of identifying those military installations, even if it's covered. But uh, if you think of the number of the satellites that is capable of taking pictures, be it the reconnaissance satellite of United States, China, Russia, India, and all other countries combined, that will be more than 50. And then we do have a civilian, Earth observation satellite, including the commercial ones, which goes beyond thousands. So every time, so if you try avoid all the, satellite with camera, if you try and hide, it's every 5 minutes there are, some sort of a satellite flying over you, so you can't really hide anything. And that's just the nature of the of current situation today.
Thank you, Mr. Suzuki. This, there is a growing global initiative for space and asteroid mining, including by India. And Japan's recent Hayabusa 2 mission showed a new progress in this direction. Do you see any potential for collaboration between Japan and India in any future space mining endeavors, in your opinion?
Oh yes, indeed. Currently, the Japanese commercial moon exploration rover is moving ahead towards moon. This is a sort of using a unique trajectory, so that it takes about a month to arrive on the moon. But this is the first attempt of the Japanese, any Japanese spacecraft landing on the moon, and this spacecraft is operated by the company called the iSpace. The iSpace is a commercial company initially working together with the company in India. So Japanese lunar mission is always been, India has been always the partner for commercial and civilian exploration on the moon. JAXA and ISRO, India Space Research Organization, have the bilateral collaboration framework for the lunar exploration. And, Japan and India has been in cooperation and of many kind. And lunar exploration is part of the asteroid mining. Of course, Luna is not, the moon is not an asteroid, but, this scheme of the, lunar exploration can be applied for the asteroid mining. But asteroid mining is not really promising at this moment, but the lunar exploration is, because it is well known that there are water on the north and south poles of the moon, and there is a possibility that we can exploit to use the resources on the moon. So I think particularly, it doesn't make sense if you go to the moon and extract the resources and coming back on the Earth. But if you go there and use the resources on the moon for the development of the, let's say, lunar village, or any activities on the surface of the moon, then it will be very variable. So the use of these astro-minded mind material can be used in space, and I think there is a prospect on that.
Thank you, Suzuki. Japan has recently formed its first space ops squadron to serve as a space situational awareness ops center. And do the SSA resources of the JAXA and other operators contribute to the military space ops squadron? And are the civilian SSA requirements met by the SSA, by the Space Ops Squadron? And should, in your opinion, SSA be a civilian agency or the military? And does Japan differentiate between military SSA and the civilian SSA?
Very good question. Thank you very much. The Japan has established a space squadron, which is now called the Space Group, Space Operation Group, which is now expanding because of the capabilities that the Japan SSA capabilities is expanding. The JAXA has contributed technologically, but it is not involved in the operation. So the technological part, yes, the construction of the radar, JAXA was involved, and but operational side, the self-defense force has been trained with United States for identifying the objects through the information acquired by the radar. The SSA should be civil or military? That's a good question. Initially, it was military, but I think there is a change of dynamics after the Trump administration issuing the so-called SPD-3. SPD is a space policy directive, the third space policy directive. This SPD-3 is designating the Department of Commerce as the initial the center of operation of the civilian, commercial, and military SSA, which is called the STM, the Space Traffic Management. The Department of Commerce is now under discussion with the Department of Defense to transfer all the information which are acquired from which is acquired through the radars owned by the DoD, and to control the information which are combined with the information coming from the civilian agency and the commercial operators of the commercially available SSA data. So the Department of Commerce will establish something called the OADR, which is an open architecture for data repository. So this data repository, or OADR, is open to public, which means open to everybody. And this will provide the sort of a sanitized data of the of space object in orbit, and to identify how these space objects are moving, and to avoid the collision by the responsibility of the operators of spacecraft. So any operators of spacecraft, for example, the ISRO has many satellites to operate. So ISRO goes to OADR and to monitor the space object which may have in a harmful direction of the assets of that owns and operated by Israel. So these OADR is going to be the center of the SSA capability. So the capability will remain in the hands of military, but the use of information will be, I mean, because there are so many civilian operators in the world that requires those accurate information to avoid collision. The SSA data should be open to public, and I think this OADR idea is the way to go to make the space more safer place.
Thank you, Dr. Suzuki. The next question is about the future partnership between India and Japan towards developing aerospace capability with military applications. Your views on that?
Right, dual use applications has a lot of potential. Japan will be and possibly develop the capabilities with India for the dual use purposes. However, I think there is no such program yet, but I think possibly what will be the potential cooperation is something called hosted payload. Hosted payload is to host the payload with the bus of the existing satellite. Japan is currently under development of the first hosted payload case of using the geostationary satellite for the navigation system and hosting the U.S. military payload, which is to monitor the space debris. So the space debris or the space-based SSA sensor in India for the dual use purposes. However, I think there is no such program yet, but I think possibly what will be the potential cooperation is something called hosted payload. Hosted payload is to host the payload with the bus of the existing satellite. Japan is currently under development of the first hosted payload case of using the geostationary satellite for the navigation system and hosting the U.S. military payload, which is to monitor the space debris. So the space debris or the space-based SSA sensors will be hosted, the US sensors will be hosted by the Japanese satellite. So I think this is an interesting case, and we will be able to pursue such type of cooperation, not just for the operational part, but the combination of hardware, which can be putting the military payload on the civilian programs. So those are the cases that may have potential in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Suzuki. In your talk, you highlighted three reasons for Japan militarization program, including the space. So, in your opinion, which is the prime driver of this? Whether it's the US pressure to take an independent program in alliance, with the US, or the increasing threat from China and North Korea, or Japan's own decision to go beyond the US alliance system and eventually shed its pacifist approach?
Well, that's a very difficult question. I would say all of the above. But I think the US pressure is not the major driver. Threat from China and North Korea is the driver. but also there is the willingness of Japan to go beyond the pacifist constitution and pacifist framework. So it's really difficult to say what was the prime driver, but I think the prime driver is definitely the threat from China, China and North Korea for sure. But other two elements cannot be discounted.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Suzuki. If, with increasing commercial use of space, if any commercial satellite of a country is attacked in free space, does it amount to declaration of war against that country? For example, if Russia shoots down a Starlink satellite, will it amount to declaring war on the United States?
That is an excellent question, which is currently under discussion in every country, because there is no rules, there is no law, there is no practices. So this is a totally new situation for anybody. Technically speaking, the Outer Space Treaty extends the jurisdiction of the national control over the satellite, which is registered. The jurisdiction on the satellite will be extended by the jurisdiction of the registered country. So the Indian satellites registered in India will be considered as a part of the Indian jurisdiction. But the commercial company in India developing a satellite together with, let's say, France and registered in France, is India going to be the country to have the jurisdiction? Technically, yes, but it is a shared jurisdiction with France, which means that the attack on this particular satellite may be an attack against India, but also attack against France. And more complicating problem is that if United States military using this satellite for the military operation, and let's say Russia consider this satellite, India-made, registered in France satellite, is making trouble for Russian military activities, then Russia may destroy this satellite. So is it India or France or United States which are taking the or taking the act of retaliation? There's no rules, there's no practices. No one knows how to deal with this situation. So the idea of space is that it is not, it is very difficult to use the conventional understanding of the deterrence, because, space is not a territory. Deterrence is all about the territorial defense. So if there is an attack on your territory, then you might, reply or to retaliate. But space, it's so complicated because it cannot be geographically defined. So that is the very much complication of the retaliation of this attack on the commercial satellite.
Thank you, Dr. Suzuki. We come to the last question of the evening. Japanese MOD statement said through the Japan Defense Focus Volume 1 to 5 that Japan is building the capability to disrupt the C4I of opponents with combined use of the electromagnetic domain. Does this mean that Japan is willing to use this capability as a preemptive offensive countermeasure in space?
That is another good question. No, Japan will not take any preemptive measures for in case of the imminent attack on Japan. We are in discussion about the possible scenario of what is the case of allowing the exercise of the self-defense, right of self-defense before the launch of the missiles or before the, incoming, before the attack on, which is imminent. So there is no clear-cut answer, but if there is a clear-cut intention and there is a reason to believe that there is preparation of attack, and if there is a recognizable sign that the launch is imminent, then Japan may exercise the counter-strike capabilities before the launch. However, again, this is a very tricky situation because it can be interpreted as the preemptive attack. So we need to develop our own theory of, what is considered to be a preeminent attack and what is considered to be the imminent attack. So, so we haven't really done yet. So I can't really tell you that there is a possible exercise of the Japanese counter-strike capabilities as a preeminent attack, and I think it won't happen anyway until we can have a clear definition of what is definition of attack and what is preemptive attack.
Thank you very much, Dr. Suzuki, for a very illuminating talk and educating us, and handling the Q&A with your knowledge. I think a lot of questions got raised, and thank you for on behalf of the Director General CAPS for taking your precious time off, and we apologize for keeping you awake till so late in the evening. But I'm sure definitely the people, the entire fraternity which has attended the talk would have benefited immensely from it. Thank you once again on behalf of CAPS, and may I request DG to say thanks from his side, and let us all clap together to thank Dr. Suzuki.
Thank you, Dr. Suzuki. It was extremely great to listen to you, and you have absolutely the total knowledge on the subject and the amount of research you have done over the years. And we understand that you're likely to visit again in the next 3-4 months, and we'll be very happy to host you in CAPS and have more interactions, because you have a very wide area of specialization. So we really look forward, and on behalf of everybody, I think let's all put your hands up, please. Even if you can't be heard, I will put our hands together for them. Yes.
Thank you very much. Perhaps you may recognize that my background is the IIC, the India International Center, and I will always have my willingness to go back to India anytime.
Looking forward. All the best. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us this evening. It's always a pleasure to host you all. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.